Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation by the American Iris Society. Please support the organization by becoming a member. Go to irises.org and click on Join. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Tonight's topic is an introduction to growing Pacific Coast irises by Bob Sussman. And Bob began Matilija Nursery in 1992 after working in banking and finance for several years. Matilija is primarily a California native plant nursery, with Pacific Coast irises being emphasized in the last 10 years. His hybridizing techniques have focused on irises that seem to be relatively well adapted for the warmer Southern California region. And Bob is president of the Society for Pacific Coast Native Iris. So welcome, Bob, and take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm glad Kathleen is here too. Actually, I'll just let you read the screen for a second. And then I already know what it says, but it's sort of a placeholder for me to make comments on. But maybe just before we get into that and the presentation, Gary's right. As he mentioned, we're primarily a native plant nursery. Pacific Coast irises naturally occur from California on up to Washington. There are 11 species, or maybe 12, or maybe 13. This is something that Kathleen has done some work in, and has some other dichotomies or different species naming, based on a different way, the more current way of approaching things. They tend to be shorter irises, so somewhere around a foot. The range of colors amongst the native irises, it's lavenders to browns to yellows to blues to purples. It's a fairly wide range. The irises tend to be relatively small. In geography-wise, or where they occur, they seem like they occur from northern Santa Barbara County, which is above Los Angeles, on up into Washington State, and they will all cross. And you get all kinds of intermediate populations. So if you're walking around or hiking around near the Bay Area, you might find something that you're not sure what exactly it is. And the way the species have historically been identified is more by characteristic, not by flower color. It's sort of a misnomer, but many of the native plant people ask for the lavender Douglas iris. Well, Douglas comes in lavender. They're lavender ones, but they're also almost white ones and yellow ones, seldom yellow one, but different colors and different variations of purple. The thing that denotes it is more, are the leaves kind of shiny on top and flat on the bottom? Does it branch? What are the seed capsules like? And things of that nature. Bloom time is usually mid-February through early June. At least that's the bloom time of the irises that we grow. Our first ones we pick up in February, and the last one's probably early June. I know Gary Knipe had one that we were growing, and I'm not sure, it's in the inventory someplace, but it tends to flower in November, and then it'll stop, and then in spring it'll grow. So or rebloom. So, that's kind of slide number one. Everything's calm. Okay, are there any questions before we go to slide number two? Oh.
Seems like we're okay, Bob.
Okay, slide number two. This was taken in Oregon. This is Iris 10X. If you walk around in Oregon and even Northern California, you'll find these in meadows, in kind of grassy meadows in full sun. In the area where we are in Southern California, you really can't grow them in full sun. It's a real struggle, and they won't persist. So where we are, or where Andy is in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, they all have to go in shady areas. The closer you are to the sun, the more or the closer you are to the coast rather, the more sun they can handle. But you can see too, compared to beardeds, these are very narrow, kind of very narrow petals, very narrow parts, falls and standards and style arms and so forth. Okay. I got this map from CalFlora. CalFlora you can find on the web, and you basically just input, Iris douglasiana. It'll give you all the locations. But the point being, you can see the southernmost area is basically northern Santa Barbara County, and the frequency picks up as you go up the coast. Now, there are a couple of inland observations. You'll see some blue spots that are more inland. I don't know how valid those are or aren't. With CalFlora, you basically input the location where you've made the observation. And that's usually a pretty good indicator. But in some cases, it could be a botanical garden. For instance, if you looked at the Santa Barbara Botanical Garden, you'd see Iris douglasiana appears there, but it does not grow there. So this is not a perfect sort of indicator of where things are or where you can find these, but it's not a bad first source. Some of our native irises only occur in a rather small area of the state and up into Oregon. These, I believe, are Iris innomatanata. Hard one to spit out, but often known for the veining and used a lot in crossing for the veining. These are some of the early selections, and maybe to comment here as we get to the early selections. In the early days of people kind of growing these for gardens and plant collectors, which is maybe 1920s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s, even though some of the botanists from Europe came here in the middle 1830s, the other kind of native plant collectors, botanical gardens, and things like that would do a lot of seed collecting, perhaps even digging some things up, which is highly frowned upon now, but a lot of seed collecting in different areas. And so the first irises were not so spectacular. And this is a group of irises that were, that are, I guess you could say, historic. The one on the far right is, I think, is a Munzii. It's one of the Lenz Munziis that was a big award winner. I can't recall the name, but with a lot of these things, some of the early irises disappear, and it's similar to anything else. You have people that are collectors, maybe nurseries that sell a particular hybrid. Someone collects them, they pass on, they leave the house and the garden to their children. Their children couldn't care less. And a lot of these things disappear forever. And you can see some of the names, like in the lower left, that picture is from Gene Witt. In the sort of center bottom, that's Canyon Snow. Of all the Pacific Coast irises, Canyon Snow is probably the best known, and that comes from the Santa Barbara Botanical Garden. Over on the right, I believe that's Valley Banner. I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that's Valley Banner. So from these and successive generations, you do get, the fancier, more ornate, bigger falls, bigger flowers, taller flowers. You get the result that people get that hybridize things. Any questions before I hop on?
Don't have anything in the chat yet.
Okay, shall I go on, do you think?
Yes, I think.
Okay. All right. And this just sort of summarizes what I had mentioned in the quote old days. people thought in terms of wild and natural look. A lot of the hybridization outside the native area had to do with extending the growing range as well as extending the bloom time. So there was less emphasis placed on, magnificent flowers. It was more durability. This picture was taken from the Rancho Santa Ana Botanical Garden, which is inland California in Claremont. Claremont is just beyond Pasadena. And this was the garden that Dr. Lenz was the director of from, I believe, the middle 50s to, I don't know when he left that position, but I would guess maybe the middle 90s. But he did a lot of collecting and hybridizing, trying for durability more than anything else. And in fact, I've told this story to Gary and to Andy that a couple of years ago, I gave a quote mini trek, sort of a regional trek, and Rancho Santa Ana was kind of in between a lot of the people in various groups. And I wanted to give sort of a demonstration on how you hybridize, Pacific Coast irises. And I sort of had some ulterior motives because I wanted to collect seed from the Munzii, from Lenz's Munzii collection. As I mentioned, a lot of these things get forgotten. A lot of these great flowering historical plants just sort of disappear. And so I figured, well, let me see if I can cross some of this. And the deal was that with the garden is that we would give them some of the results, some of the seeds, and we would keep some of the seeds. But when I got there, I couldn't figure out what was what. I mean, I'm these things, the Pacific Coast irises can look very similar to one another in certain circumstances. And when they're crossed, you have really like no idea what's going on. I figured, okay, well, just make the best of it, show people how to hybridize, which we did. I came back in May to collect what we had done. And by the time you get there in May, you're already going above 100 degrees. So it's very hot. So we collected stuff, and I called the woman that's the director there, and I said, well, I read the map as to where things were, where the Munziis were, where the Douglasianas were, and when I got there, I couldn't tell the difference. And she just sort of laughed and said, well, Dr. Lenz was a student of somebody, I don't remember who, at Washington University in St. Louis. And they believed in crossing everything with everything to get things that would survive. And so she says, well, if you can't figure out what those things are, you're no different than any of us. So, just a different way of looking at it. But how they got things to survive with many days over 100 looking the way they did is beyond me. That took a lot of years of successive generations. But they look very, very Douglas-like. Here's a kind of a close-up. Okay. I've been kind of rattling along for a while. Are there questions or?
If anybody has a question, you can unmute yourself.
I have a question. Are you going to talk about how to get the seeds to sprout? Somebody gave me a whole batch of seeds, I think from Native Sons Nursery. And when I gave them to a friend who normally does my seed sprouting for me, he gave them back to me and he said, the seeds can take up to 10 years to sprout. I won't do this. Here, good luck. How do you get the seeds to sprout?
Well, first of all, what you need to do is you need to join the Society for Pacific Coast Native Iris, because every year we have an annual seed exchange. So you can buy seeds. They don't take 10 years to, it's possible you might have some, if you store them, it is possible for them to germinate after 10 years of storage, but they come right up.
No, they don't, because I put them out in my usual seed flat and only one of them sprouted.
Well, you didn't get them from us. That's the problem. Ours come right up. I mean, we're seeding the flats right now. You know, we grow thousands of them. They're fresh, it's fresh seed. So it's relatively new seed. It's seeds that we collected in spring. And we just store them in a dry place, in a kind of a warm, dry place. There's no refrigeration or anything like that. We sow them to seed flats. The seed flats are just regular nursery seed flats. The seed mix that we use is about 75% perlite and 25% of like a peat mix. So the water actually goes right through it, but they can stay kind of damp. We also use a little bit of time-release fertilizer mixed in, and they should come up in about 60 to 90 days. That's what ours do. And where are you? Let me ask you that. Are you in, if you got them from Native Sons, then are you in the same?
I'm in Reseda and it's stinking hot. It's been 118 degrees all summer.
Ay. Yes, I know Reseda. Okay. Ours we're just sowing to seed flats right now. And that's all I can tell you. They'll be up in about October, November.
Will the seeds have rotted if I've left them in the ground all summer?
That I don't know the answer to that. I just don't.
I'll try again.
Try again. If you know, I'll tell you, if you join the society has a really good assortment of seeds. We donate a lot of stuff to it. Yeah, if you come by, I'll give you some seeds. What can I tell you?
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, moving. Any other questions?
No, not yet.
Okay, and let me cut. You know, growing these things in Reseda is challenging. If you buy them as plants, they should be planted in October through about March in the shade, and water them about once a week. When you get to summer, maybe even every other week, because it is easy to rot them.
No, I have very good luck with them in the ground.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Kathleen does mention on chat that we also have lots of tips for seed starting and growing on the website.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. So you need to join. What can I tell you?
I'll think about it.
Okay. All right. All right. You know, from kind of the early hybridization where things are fairly simple, things can get fairly ornate in a short period of time. The one in the upper left is a big award winner. It's a beautiful iris. It's a Jogio iris, ocean blue. I use it a lot in hybridizing. It's just a magnificent iris, and it grows well for me. Most of the blues don't, but it does. In the middle is one called Untitled. I use that, or we use that for the veining. So in crosses, I use that as one of the cross parents to get veining in some of the new hybrids. On the right, I believe that's one of mine, or it's now showing another Gio one. I'm not sure. Lower left is one of mine, Bonnie Rose. Clincher in the middle, and I'm not sure which one that is on the far right. That might be one of the ones that we refer to as no ID. We do get, some of these things do get lost. And if they get lost, then I just call them, like everybody else, sort of no ID and the date they bloomed. Okay. To cross these, you cross these the same way as you'd cross bearded or Louisianas or anything else. It's the same process. We do have a battle from time to time with honeybees, because if the honeybees find these first, then they've already been there, so to speak. And were referred to as open pollinated. After, after the seeds have been pollinated, they form capsules, same as any other iris. And if it's from one of our crosses or something we crossed, we would tag it or mark it so we know, what the cross parents were. And we have a list, but we also try and match off the list with the labels. Okay. And questions?
I don't see any right now.
Okay. All right. After a relatively short period of time, maybe a month, the capsules are ready to open or collect. We generally just clip them and stick them in a brown paper bag. And ID, put right down on the bag what they are, and just stick it in, on a shelf or in a drawer or something like that. There's no refrigeration, just warm and especially dry. And you can see, when it gets to be, very late summer, early fall, we then collect the seeds. We take the seeds out of the bag, separate them from the seed capsule and put them in an envelope with the cross parents and the collection date. So this one you can see is a cross between Bonnie Rose and Now Showing. And then in like somewhere between early September and mid-October, we usually plant out all of our seeds. You can plant them out, late winter. I mean, that works too. But we try and move them along as fast as we can. Sort of a second step in organizing them. On the left, we usually sew a lot of these things to small 4-inch containers, because from our crosses, we don't often have, hundreds of seeds. We might cross 2 or 3 particular flowers. And so we don't have enough to put in a seed flat, but we have enough to put in these small containers. And we do a pretty decent job at labeling what we have. I'm sure this is the same as lots of other people. As they get bigger, we transplant them from the 4-inch pots generally to 2-inch, what are called rose pots. And we just let them stay there and root out and get bigger. As a generally speaking, I guess, there's a lot of generally speaking here tonight. We hold them over the summer in those 2-inch containers, because now season-wise or date-wise, you're probably talking about middle spring. And so we don't plant things out in middle spring in nursery containers. So we just hold them in these rose pots. The soil mix in the rose pots, it took us a while to sort of, I guess you could say, figure out the obvious. The soil mix is also extremely well draining. It's about 75% perlite and maybe 1/4 of a peat mix. So when you water them, it goes right through, and the chance of rotting things is real insignificant. And we just wait till the following fall to start planting these out. Now, sometimes late summer, we're planting some of them out now. Some of them are showing white roots. So as long as they're showing white roots, we're planting them out. And we're planting them in the shade with also a very well-drained potting mix. Question? Okay. If there are no questions, we'll go on.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe we jumped a little ahead. Let me go back for a second. In the propagation process, and I think I come to it later, but I can mention it now. It's not a big deal. We divide our Pacific Coast irises that we have in big pots. We ultimately transplant them up to bigger pots, like 3-gallon pots, which has the same surface area as a 5-gallon pot, but not the depth. we divide them from October to the end of November. If you go beyond that, the divisions have a higher propensity to rot. I mean, you can push it a little further, but if you start dividing things into January, for us, where we are, and we don't get snow, so for our seasons and cycles, it's sort of October through the end of November seems to work best. Now we can go on. All right. These are actually some of our newer hybrids. And many of these, we finally have enough to start selling this year. If you think about it, this is, a really long process. If you cross, across an iris, a Pacific Coast iris, and this is true of bearded, I don't know if it's true of Louisiana's, but I would guess so. It's about 2 years, if you're lucky, from cross to flower. And then if if you like the flowers, if there's something exceptional about them, something that's different from lots of other flowers, you leave them alone and you revisit them in the following fall. So if they make it through summer, that's usually a pretty good screen. So if you have something you like that flowers nicely in spring that's exceptional, you leave it alone. Hopefully it makes it through summer, but oftentimes it doesn't. And then in fall, that's when you divide it. And you get between 6 and maybe 10 divisions. So here you are looking at year 2.5, and you don't have a heck of a lot of plants to sell. So you have to repeat the process, and it takes somewhere around 3 years before you have enough to sell. Sometimes you get some that are more aggressive and have more divisions, but generally that's what you're looking at. So you're looking at a 5-year process. It's a long process.
There's a question from Lisa. It says, can you leave them in the 4-inch pots until they bloom, I guess, or do you need to put them in these larger pots?
No, you really don't. We move things from the small pots, from the 2-inch pots to the maybe 3-gallon pots, also in October, November. So if you have something in a 4-inch pot that you held over since, say, last year, if I'm understanding this correctly, plant it out in fall or put it into a bigger pot in fall, if I'm getting this right.
Okay.
Do you have to move it into the larger pot? Can you leave it in the 4-inch for another year?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Much beyond that, then I think it needs to find a bigger home.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And these, I'm looking, these are actually all of ours. And about, of the 8, I don't know, 6 we'll have for sale. We have enough of. So like I said, it takes a long time. Now we're kind of going to be scrolling through some of the first blooms. Lots of purples. This purple, though, is particularly intense. And the one on the right is also a very interesting color and form, but the one on the right is no longer with us. So oftentimes, too often, they don't make it through. This is not their native range. And they just, it's not what they're used to. So we do lose, we lose a lot of stuff, until we get to the stuff that grows well.
Bob, you had mentioned when you were transplanting seedlings.
Yes.
And there's a question, says what color are the roots before they turn white? And then I see that Kathleen has answered that now and says roots are brown when they are not growing.
Yeah, absolutely right. And some of them, sometimes it doesn't look like they have any roots at all. The roots, the old roots just wither and the new white roots come out. Some, however, seem to retain the white roots. I've noticed that. Some of, or some of them have the white roots growing earlier. And it also seems to be that the heavy perlite mix, where we're watering more frequently, they don't seem to go through so much of a dormant phase. You know, you can take the pot, separate the rose pot from the iris in July, and you'll see white roots with green tips. That's atypical. And in a pot with regular soil mix, it likely won't happen. And in the ground, it won't happen. So it seems like the mix can kind of alter the growing habit. So,
Okay,
you know,
thank you.
we used to grow them or put them in 2-inch containers in more of a traditional potting mix. The idea being that they should start getting used to growing in a soil that's more similar to where they're ultimately going to end up. When we would get heavy rains in winter, we would have a large percentage, a very large percentage, would rot. You know, part of it is they were, you know, relatively new. Part of it is they were in a plastic container, and the container itself wasn't porous enough, but it retained water. And for how we grow things, you know, we still have to have the small plastic containers no matter what. That's just the way it is. If we found when we upped the perlite percentage, that problem went away. The deep secrets. Some of ours, the one in the left, while very beautiful, is very slow growing, very unaggressive. So it will take years, probably not worth the time. The one on the bottom right, kind of an orange brown, interesting color, aggressive, easy to grow. A couple of others of ours. Now I've also mixed in a couple of Mitchell Award winners, and I won't tell you which ones. Yeah, you could probably figure it out, but I know Kathleen will figure it out. But there are in here a couple of Mitchell Award winners. You know, just beautiful veining and very wide falls and beautiful color on the one on the right.
I have a question about general growth. I grew canyon snow, and it got very big and was enormously happy. I mean, it got over a yard across in the clump. But the others that I've tried to grow have never grown as well. They are just not as aggressive or as happy. Is canyon snow specifically wonderful, or did I have it in a wonderful place?
Well, it depends on what you're gauging canyon snow against. Canyon snow generally in the garden does pretty well. It's a very easy one to grow in the garden. It hasn't been all that easy for me to propagate, which I can't, it doesn't make sense that would be the case, but that seems to be the case.
I'll go along with that, because when I tried to transplant it, it was not happy.
Yeah. I'm not sure, you know, why, but that's sort of an old standard, you know, canyon snow. And generally, if they're left in a place for many years, they do quite well. But it hasn't been an easy one for me to grow. Now, the other ones that you might be growing with it, you know, I don't know what yardstick exactly, but a lot of them really are difficult to grow and they're not real aggressive. We lost a lot of, you know, we've sort of gotten to a point where they grow pretty well. But to get to that point, we lost an awful lot of them getting to that point. So that's, you know, that's all I can say. But generally speaking, canyon snow does seem to grow better than many or most. I know people have had difficulty, and I have too, with the blue ones, with the various blues. Ocean blue, however, we don't. Ocean blue is an easy one to grow for me. It's an easy one to grow, just sort of period. So
Kathleen mentions that canyon snow is an Iris Douglasana. I have trouble saying it.
Douglasiana.
Selection and is very vigorous. Modern hybrids tend to be much smaller and less vigorous.
I'll go along with that, yeah.
You know, in canyon snow is a great one. It's a wonderful iris. I would say there are others now, at least the stuff we grow, that is absolutely as vigorous and has flowers that are absolutely just as big, and it's just as tall. Canyon snow is also a taller one, somewhat taller. If you look at the ones at Rancho Santa Ana, those are vigorous, aggressive irises. How they got to that point and how long it took them to get to that point, I don't know, but it took a while. And Dr. Lenz was, you know, a heck of a lot more adept and smarter than I am. But, you know, but bottom line, canyon snow is an excellent one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, questions, comments?
I don't see any more at the moment.
Okay. Well, I guess in the riddle, which one is the Mitchell Award winner? We'll take the one in the upper left out. It's not, but it's 7 inches across. That's a big flower. That's probably the biggest flower that we've dealt with, and I don't know where it is in the nursery. You know, says something for my sense of organization.
Well, that is big.
Yeah.
And there's a question from Phyllis Wilburn. Says, I have clay soil. How should I amend the soil to planting in the ground?
Phyllis, I have clay soil too. You know, generally, you know, the orientation of native plant people is you don't amend soil, because the amendments eventually disappear. So I would say in a situation like that, you know, you would plant your irises in the shade at the right time of year. Plant them a bit high, so above grade. So when you irrigate or when it rains, the water moves away from that central crown area. And I think that'll help.
Okay. And there's just a comment from Kathleen also. It says, Bob is growing nicely, hardy, and bigger PCI than many others. And his plants do well for me in Southwest Washington too.
That's, yeah, excellent comment, of course. But one thing it's kind of odd, and I think maybe I said this earlier on when not everybody was here, and maybe Kathleen wasn't here as well. But a lot of the irises that we got from sort of general sources, or I mean, I shouldn't refer to them as general, expert sources, where their climate and soils are very different than ours. And so a lot of them we lost, but not all of them. So it seems like some of the hybrids from cooler climates with more acidic soils, where the soil texture, it drains better, it's more organic. When you go from that environment to our environment, which is, as Phyllis was mentioning, heavy clay. I mean, when it rains, you can step on the ground and the mud will come over your shoes and you can't pull your shoes up. So we have heavy clay. But it seems like the ones that we can get to grow here will grow further north in the area that is really good to grow in. So coming from, if they survive here, it seems like they grow there. But if they grow there, it's not a guarantee that they will do well down here.
And then a basic question, how do you transplant the iris? Depth, soil, etc.
Okay. We almost never transplant them once they're in the ground. But what we occasionally, what we would do is fall. For us, it'd be October, November, even into December. For places, colder climates where they might get some snow, you know, and Kathleen would be the expert on that. And other people that have checked in that are from the Pacific Northwest or from snowy regions, you know, perhaps late, you know, right after the snow, you know, right after the you know, the frost period is kind of over, you can try that. Dig them up intact. It's unlike bearded iris, where you pull them up, you break off the rhizomes that are alive, you discard the old one, you shake off the soil. Maybe you put it in some sort of a bleach solution or hydrogen peroxide solution, rinse it off, stick it out in the sun, stick it in the ground, and you're good to go. With these, you tend to dig them up intact and plant them intact. What if you want to divide them? If you want to divide them also October, November, when we divide them, and dividing them, we have some planted in the ground that we've dug up. We don't do that anymore. But we usually divide big clumps, like what you're describing. We divide big clumps, as I mentioned, kind of October, November, maybe even into December, and put them into that perlite mix, a heavy perlite mix. And that seems to hold the disease down, and they seem to do fairly well.
Okay. And when you're planting them in the soil, how deep do you plant those rhizomes?
You know, they're not deep at all. If you can dig up the clump, they likely, they should start growing, but you know, at the time when you're starting to transplant them, but the roots don't go down all that far. What is all that far? Foot and a half. You know, we've dug up clumps, and if you go down a foot or a little more, that's about where, you know, the new growth seems to be. So you're not digging. It's not like you're digging, trying to transplant an oak tree, you know, where you're going down a lot.
Okay.
Okay. Some of our newer ones, the one on the left, I thought was, you know, one of the most interesting, and that is no longer with us. That did not make it through summer. The one on the right is an interesting one that is still with us. Oh, I shouldn't say, because then you won't know which one the Mitchell Award winner is. Okay, I'll be cool now. Okay. Okay. Other comments?
There's one from Janice Shackelford, says, I have Bonnie Rose and it is doing quite well, but it is not registered and introduced. Is there a reason for not introducing your hybrids?
No, there's no good reason. Laziness comes to mind. You know, for what we do, it's less critical for us to register. Our orientation is a little bit different. You know, maybe this year I'll break down. There are a few of them I'd actually like to register. But, you know, some of it too is you get one like golden honeycomb. We refer to one in the nursery as golden honeycomb. If you go back through the AIS registry of names, you find that there's already a golden honeycomb. Well, tough. I don't care. We're selling it as golden honey. You don't want to sell something, another Pacific Coast iris of the same name. That I can understand. So, okay, we'll register it. That's the easy answer. We'll register that and a few others.
And you're in luck. As of today, Janice Shackelford is the new AIS registrar. So she's probably goading you to do that.
Well, that's fair enough. There's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of criticism of me to go around, so it's fine.
Then from D. Wilson, there says, these are gorgeous. Any chance we may be lucky and grow them here in the Arizona desert?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about that. I can't remember. I think maybe at the beginning of the presentation, when I thought I actually had PowerPoint up, but didn't. Maybe I mentioned, or maybe I was mentioning earlier on with you and with Andy, they seem to be, there's an adaptability. So what I mean by that is not that an iris can adapt, but that if you collect 1,000 seedlings from a particular iris, you can grow it in fairly different conditions. You can grow, of the 1,000, you might get 10 of them that survive and do okay. If you collect the seeds from those 10 and pitch out another 1,000, then maybe you're getting 100 that have adapted to somewhat different conditions. But I think when you're talking about Arizona, you're beyond the natural distribution of adaptability. However, it is still possible. It depends on how much work you want to do.
Yeah, and Kathleen adds shade, 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 and acidic cool water.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you're talking Phoenix, there's not enough shade in the world to make 112 down to 80. It just, you can't do it. But what you can do is, and I've tried this, I've tried experiments with this, is you can put them in pots, and during the cooler seasons or the more pleasant seasons, you just leave them on a porch in the shade, as Kathleen's saying. When it starts heating up, move the pots indoors where they're benefiting just like you are from the air conditioning. It's cooler, and you have them near a window, and they, early indications are they do just fine. I did this a few years ago, and they were doing quite well. However, if you have cats, it's not going to work.
Interesting.
Right? Do you see why? Gary, do you see why?
They're going to be digging those up.
They look at it as a big litter box.
Yep.
So so if you have cats, it's not going to work. But if you don't, it should work. You just got to get the watering under control. In the off season, they're still going to go through their normal cycle of having kind of a slower no growth season. You can't overwater them. So you're watering them in the pot maybe once every 2 weeks or something like that. And you're letting the pot drain out so they're not in a pool of water. So that's the only way I can think of where you can actually do that.
Okay.
All right. Oop, okay. How come I can't see my cursor? Okay, here are a couple more. And some more. Doc Richards used to say there are beautiful irises all around the world, but the question is, will they grow? And that's always a question that's sort of the foremost question that we have to deal with or grapple with. Okay, and let's go back. Okay, I'll give you these are ours. We'll get the Mitchell Award winner. Kathleen, I'm sure already knows, but these are our hybrids. These were first blooms last year. The one in the upper left, we have a decent quantity. We should have those for sale. That's also one of ours. The one on the right is more species-like, but it's got some really good coloring. that is one that we refer to as no ID 331, at least now, until I, fill out the forms and go register it. And I'm sure we can get some help on that. These are also ours. I can't remember the parentage in the one in the upper left, but the one in the lower right is San Ardo is one of the parents, which is an early bloomer. That's one, when these things bloom in February, that's when I start crossing, because I'll take the earliest bloomer and try and cross it with the next earliest bloomer to try and extend out the blooming season. So the other parent on this is one called Canyon Banner, which is also something I need to register. But Canyon Banner has a lot of red veining, and it's an early bloomer. Okay, the one on the left is not with us anymore. One on the right is also one of ours. These two are ours, actually. First blooms and seem to be growing very well. The one on the left, upper left, actually is pretty vigorous, and looks like we're going to get a lot of pieces out of it. Okay, there you go. These, as if you couldn't tell, these are the Mitchell Award winners. These are the Jogio iris, two of the Jogio irises.
Okay, thank you. And a couple things in chat. There was a question from Heather. How about growing in a climate-controlled greenhouse? And Kathleen says, has to be a cool house, not a warm one. And then there's a question from Meredith, says, I get iris from the hybridizer wrapped in newspaper with limited roots. What do you recommend to get them to root? And Kathleen have one comment here. It says, if the roots are white, plant them right away. If not, plant and hope they root. They often do not root if disturbed too early in their growing cycle.
Yeah, she's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And you can grow these in a greenhouse, but yeah, cool house. Yeah, I get the point. She's absolutely right about that. Or you can try them in pots and bring them indoors. Give that a shot. But yeah, if it gets too hot, they're getting too much water or water too frequently, then they'll rot.
And then a question from Jean Richter, will soaking in water encourage the rootless ones to root?
I've read that it does. Whether it does or not, I haven't seen any evidence that it does, but people have told me it does, but maybe it did for them. I don't know. I mean, for what we do, we wait until we see white roots. We don't fool with it. We might take them, flip the pot upside down, and if we can see no white roots at the bottom, we put it back in the pot and we come back out in another week or two to see what we see. We might sample 4 or 5 pots at one point in time just to see where we are. But yeah, if Kathleen's right, they should be divided later once there's some indication that the white roots are growing.
Okay. And a couple other comments. Lynn Williams says, I have had them root by soaking them in water. And Lisa says, Geo teaches that all the time. And Bob Hollingworth, they can be quite adaptable. I grew and bloomed Iris tenax in Indiana for several years. Raised bed, deep shade, and peaty soil.
Right. Yeah, you can alter the circumstances, and things like if you've got well-draining soil, things like 10x or Inominata or some of the others, they're used to the snow. I mean, they're used to a fair amount of snow, so they're used to the cold. And if you have good drainage, you can get away with a lot. And and I know that there's a lot of advice or encouragement that if they're not if they're not rooted, or if you don't see white roots, you can soak them. I know, but we don't divide them or fool with them until we actually see it. So I understand. And if Lisa would like to be the vice president in charge of Trex, that would be fine.
Okay, I think that's all the questions I have at the
Okay.
moment.
Here's what we do, kind of the timeline of what we do a little bit. I've mentioned dividing the irises. In the bigger, we pull them out of the bigger pots and divide them. And in fact, I think we sent some 4-inch pots to Lisa earlier in the year. But anyway, this is what they should look like when we pull them out of the pots to divide. And you can see the rhizomes. And we break them apart. They're the white roots. We soak them in water while we're waiting to transplant them. And in the water, we also have a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. We also seed the seed flats. The irises that we carried over the summer in the 2-inch containers, that's when we start potting them up. So fall is when there's a whole lot of stuff going on. And just as Kathleen says, it's all in the shade.
And Kathleen mentions Iris douglasana grows in gravel at the Atlanta Botanic Garden. Not a place we would expect any PCI to survive, but it does.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember where I read a similar article as many years ago, but yeah, the drainage of gravel or perlite ameliorates a lot of natural sin. So maybe it's in the gravel. Okay, what to do in winter? Kind of going through the seasons. Just keep planting. We're done dividing, but now we're planting. So now we're planting in the garden. Some of our early bloomers, they begin to flower at the end of February, and it starts picking up in March. So the numbers of different plants, different hybrids, whatever species, you get the first ones coming up early on. February is about the earliest, with a couple of exceptions. And as time goes on, it kind of peaks out at the end of March, holds the peak until through April. And in May, it starts tailing off. It starts to diminish. The numbers of flowers, the numbers of new, first blooms, start to diminish. In winter also, this is when we start to get pretty good germination. So if we're seeding in fall, early winter, we get germination sort of 90 days. Many of our divisions in fall are ready to pot up in early winter. So the things that we divided and we might have put in 2-inch containers, we would begin to put in 1-gallon pots. This for us gets kind of like a bit of a race, because the time interval where you can actually plant, the window can be very narrow. What I mean is, once you hit kind of mid-April, you should probably not plant much. And maybe even the end of March, you should probably not plant much. You just hold them over, enjoy the flowers. So if you're dividing in October, November, then maybe December, you're getting 2-inch rose pots that are rooted. End of December, you're putting them into 1-gallon pots. And then the 1-gallon pots are ready kind of mid-March. So you don't have a real long selling period. We also are starting to grow more in 4-inch pots, because we can divide things in October, November, put them into 4-inch pots, and they root out real well. And then they're ready to plant in maybe February. I think we sent Lisa a few of these last year about that time. But that allows for a longer planting window. Okay.
There's a comment, did not know much about these irises since I live in desert country. They're really beautiful, love all the lines in them, and the colors are striking. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, they are, but and it can be a challenge for us too, even when we're not in the desert.
And then Lisa mentions that Gio sets out his seedlings in May.
Sets them out to be planted, or
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to have her comment on that. Yes, she says.
so
Yeah.
he's saying you can plant them in May.
Yeah, and Kathleen mentions, remember that geography matters. Bob
Ye-
is early, Joe is mid-spring, and Pacific Northwest is late spring to early summer.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. We have other kind of group members and other friends that live in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a different cycle. And Kathleen's absolutely right. So if you try and plant them here in May, it will not be good. A lot of the divisions that are in, these are in 4-inch pots. They do bloom. I mean, they will bloom. From dividing them in sort of October, November, they will bloom in spring from 4-inch containers. And you can see sort of the massive colors, and this gets maybe into another point. There's sort of a dichotomy amongst kind of Pacific Coast iris, again, within the landscape designer group. Some of the landscape designers that design native gardens want to create kind of a natural setting. So they would kind of shy away or not be as interested in sort of the bigger hybrids. They want the smaller, more native-y looking ones, which is fine. Iris people, and maybe I'm more like, I guess I'm more like that actually. I look at individuals. You know, I'd like to have a lot of individuals if I like them, but I tend to look at the individual rather than sort of a mass planting. So there's kind of two ways of looking at it, but either way, it doesn't, I mean, it looks pretty good. You know, this is one of the shade houses in spring. Okay. Oop. Okay. In early spring, you can still get away with some stuff, but it's really pretty much over. You want to keep up the watering, and we have heavy clay soils, but sort of once a week until about May. And this is kind of it's not only geography that Kathleen was mentioning, but the soil types, I guess that's covered under geography really. But as you start getting toward the warmer months down here, you actually reduce watering frequency because rot becomes the bigger risk. So you actually cut them back, let them go dormant. In going dormant, they still have nice green leaves, but the roots are dying back. Like Kathleen mentioned, they're turning brown and kind of dying back. So you cut down the watering frequency to maybe a couple of times a month.
Okay.
And questions, Carrie?
There's a comment, well, referring to your comments about geography and being inland and coastal. Andy says that Joe Gio is in a coastal area, Bob is inland California. So that makes a difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I don't know how many days they get above 100, but I can't imagine it's many.
Yeah.
We get a lot of them. We haven't gotten any so far, at least where we are. But if you go 10 miles, they have. Palm Desert, they sure have. In the San Fernando Valley and places like that, they sure have. We get a lot of very hot weather, at least lately, and maybe we probably always have. But the news makes it seem like it's just a new thing. But in kind of October, November, you can get some really hot Santa Ana winds. And so when you turn on the news to see what's happening in Southern California, that's when you see all the giant brush fires. So even though fall can be a tough time, the internal clock of these irises starts them growing. So it's a little weird. It's definitely all a little weird, but yeah, the geography matters.
And then there's another question about the 4-inch pots. It says your 4-inch pots have 75% perlite, 25% peat mix for soil, correct?
Roughly, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, and they seem to transplant okay. I mean, I've planted a lot of them in my front and backyard from 4-inch pots, just because I do some of these oddball things to see, well, what would my customers be doing? Would my customers be succeeding if they did this? And so, you have to try it, to see what your sort of test results are. And they seem to be fine. They're not particularly deep-rooted plants.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't have any more comments or questions right now.
Okay. Okay. This is at the Rancho Santa Ana Botanical Garden. This is a mass planting, and it looks pretty nice. I mean, it looks real nice for native plant people that want a natural garden. It's really hard to beat, and you can see all around these oak trees, and under the oak trees, the really big stands of Pacific Coast irises. Now, they look more species-like, but these are ones that Dr. Lenz has hybridized through successive generations to get them to pull out the more adaptable ones. And they're really pretty. So while a lot of us might look to the unique hybrid with the particular pattern or colors, as a mass planting, they look pretty nice. And, when you're talking about inland, as I mentioned, this is inland from Los Angeles by a lot. This is in Claremont, so it's at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains, but it's very hot. It's a couple of degrees warmer than hell. I mean, it is hot beginning May, but they grow. So sandy soils in the shade, watch the summer water, and kind of experiment around, and you can find the ones that will do well. Phoenix is a little bit beyond the distribution, at least at this point.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know. Okay. What to do in summer. Summer is when things really slow down, but there's still stuff to do. We continue to look, for us, collect seed capsules and, throw them in the proverbial brown paper bag. As I mentioned, you're actually reducing watering frequency, even though it's hot. Less water actually works better. Let them be dormant. Let them slow down. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of rotting. They'll still have their nice green leaves. In a lot of cases, the roots, most cases, maybe all cases, the roots are dying back, but they will start growing again in fall. And there they wait and sleep again, and then the cycle begins all over. So I think that was the end.
Okay.
So,
And there was a question, do you sell from a website? And then Andy put up the link to your website, and also a link to Rancho Santa Ana Botanical Garden.
terrific. Yeah, we don't really sell online. You can call me up, towards the end of fall, and nag me, and we'll do something. Sometimes I'll put something up on Facebook, or if we have a lot of the 4-inch. But in Washington State, Bob Siemens in Seattle, and the name of his nursery just escapes me for a second, but he sells stuff online. He actually has a proper online site. We sort of don't. We did at one point, and we just weren't selling enough enough things online to kind of make it work out. And we found that if we spend similar time kind of marketing or spending time in our general area, you know, it seems to pan out better for us. But still, we still, you know, we can still be beaten into it, I suppose. And we do ship once in a, we do ship, and they do make it to the other end. The 4-inch pots ship a lot better. They actually ship very well. The one, you can't really ship 1-gallon pots. You can't really ship rhizomes. I mean, I know people do it. I know one person does it who's far more knowledgeable than I am, but and far more accomplished than I am. But we don't. So we do send them in 4-inch pots from time to time, and they seem to work out okay.
Kathleen says Bob's garden in Seattle is Leonine iris.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then there's a question, what do you do when the leaves do turn brown?
Turning brown for Pacific Coast irises is not a good thing. You can just ignore it. If they turn brown where the leaves connect to the rhizome, that's usually an exceedingly bad thing. If they just kind of turn brown, you know, you can cut them out if you want, or just ignore them.